Hey everyone, welcome to Lesson 5.3 on the Mexican-American War. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain both the causes and the effects of the Mexican-American War. Pretty simple objective. So let's start off and talk about the start of the Mexican-American War, which took place in 1848. So we're going to rewind back to the time of Andrew Jackson. And if you remember, the Republic of Texas was originally part of Mexico. They invited Americans to move in and settle there, and eventually those Americans led a revolution. Texas became an independent country called the Republic of Texas, and initially it was not allowed to join the United States, but after about a decade, it was added to the Union. Now, the problem with the Republic of Texas was when it joined the U.S., the Texas-Mexico border was uncertain. We claimed a border further into Mexico's territory than they agreed to, and they claimed a border further up into Texas than we did. So there was this span of land that was disputed by the two countries. Now, President James Polk, when he ran for president of the United States as a Democrat, was a huge fan of Manifest Destiny, and he made promises that he would add Oregon and Cuba to the United States. But more importantly, he said we would acquire the South, what is today the Southwest United States, as well as the lucrative state of California. So Polk set out on a mission to take that territory from Mexico. The Mexican-American War started in that gray boundary dispute between Texas and Mexico. President Polk ordered U.S. troops to the Rio Grande River, which we said was the U.S.-Mexico border. And he said that there were national security issues and that he needed to arm the border against a Mexican invasion. Mexico, however, said the Rio Grande River was firmly within their territory, and when the U.S. troops crossed the border, they basically brought war into Mexico. So when Mexico fired on American troops on the Rio Grande, they said that they were defending their territory. We said it was an unprovoked attack on the United States, and that was all that President Polk needed to push a Democratic majority in Congress to war. The course of the war itself was pretty quick. The United States crosses the northern border. We enter the city of Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico and take Mexico City, and we also take California. The war is not a very long-lasting war, but the impacts of it are important, especially what's called the Mexican Cession. In the treaty with Mexico, the cession is the land that Mexico ceded or gave up to the United States, and it included California, Nevada, Arizona, parts of Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado. It's the Southwest United States today. It's a significant chunk of land that we acquired. It was about 50% of Mexico's territory. The war also had political ramifications, especially for the Whig Party. We see a split emerge in the Whigs, where Northern Whigs who are opposed to Manifest Destiny and opposed to slavery largely opposed the war. And that included a young member of the House of Representatives named Abraham Lincoln, who was a vocal critic of President Polk and the war effort. They felt that the war was just the Democrats' excuse to acquire territory and to expand slavery, and there was no legitimate cause for it. Southern Whigs, however, many of whom were slaveholders, formed an alliance with the Democratic Party, and they supported the war and the idea of Manifest Destiny. So we see the Whig Party divide along regional lines. There was also a debate that emerged about what to do with slavery in the new Mexican Cession territory. Congressman David Wilmot, who was a Democrat from the North, introduced what's called the Wilmot Proviso in the House of Representatives. And this was a clause in a bill that was to fund the war that said that any territory acquired from Mexico would be closed to slavery. Wilmot was not necessarily an opponent of slavery, but he was an advocate for what's called the Free Soil Movement, which meant that Western territory should be reserved for free labor, for working class white people. And the Free Soil Movement opposed the expansion of slavery into that territory, fearing that slave labor would drive down the wages of white workers who would eventually move out there. So the Wilmot Proviso launched a firestorm. I often say it's like Pandora's box, if you know your mythology. Pandora opened a box and she let out all evil in the world. That's kind of what the Wilmot Proviso does. It fails in the House of Representatives. It's not passed. It's dead in the water. But Democrats and Southerners are very concerned that the proviso may come up again, especially if there's a Whig president that comes into office. So now they are on alert for this, and they're concerned that the Wilmot Proviso, while dead, may be resurrected. And that was an area of significant concern. There was also some debates about the rights of people of color who lived in the Southwest. If you would have traveled to the Mexican Cession, there were Mexicans that lived there. Latinx people who were Mexican citizens who didn't do anything. They didn't move. They didn't relocate. It's just one day their house was in Mexico and the next day their house was suddenly in the United States. And so there were questions about, are these people citizens of the United States? What are they and what rights do they have? Native Americans were also included in that. Mexico had several treaties with Native people of the Southwest, and the question was, would the United States continue to honor those treaties or not? So we'll take a look at that a little bit deeper here. As far as the Mexican citizens go, the treaty that ended the war made vague promises that one day they would acquire U.S. citizenship, but that was never defined on what that timeline would be. And it did not happen for a very long time. So in essence, the Mexican citizens simply became residents in the United States, but did not have any of the rights of citizenship. And what happened is, as white settlers moved into the territory, they just snatched land away from the Mexican people. They just took it, sometimes by force, sometimes by just coming in and building a house on it. And because the Mexican citizens, or the Mexican people, did not have American citizenship, despite the fact they were living in the U.S., they could not take any legal action. So we saw the land holding of the Latinx people in the Southwest stripped away by white settlers, and increasingly the Latinx people were pushed into what are called barrios, are all Mexican communities. So we see racial segregation emerges in that territory in which the former Mexican citizens used to be a majority. We also see the United States come in and they have to renegotiate treaties with the Native people since the Mexican treaties were no longer valid. Initially, the people of the Southwest, the Apache Nation, which was one of the largest in the Southwest, made agreements with the U.S. to allow safe passage of white travelers across their territory as long as they didn't stop. However, when white people began to flood into the territory, they did just what they weren't supposed to do, which is stop and begin to establish settlements and towns on land that belonged to the Apache people. When the Apache resisted that, often violently, to drive those settlers out because they were against the terms of the agreement, the United States military came in and was determined to put Indians on what were called reservations, land the federal government reserved or set aside for the Native people. The Apache wanted none of that because their land was their land. And all of a sudden, to have the U.S. military tell them they were restricted to one small part of it, especially a part that was not good for farming, provoked the Apache War. And it was a long drawn out conflict between Native Americans in the Southwest and the United States military. It will begin in the 1850s and it does not end until 1924, almost 70 years later, that the Apache continue to fight for their rights and to try to get the United States to uphold their treaty agreements. So let's review. The causes of the Mexican-American War, clearly Manifest Destiny was in there, and the pressure from the slave states, and the effects, the political effects on the Whigs, the debate about slavery, the debate about what to do with people of color who lived in that region. If you have questions about this lecture, feel free to email your teacher or ask them in person. And as always, have a great day.